Hey there, this is Celia. I'm going to continue on with the fourth part of my Lyme story. I'm going to talk about some symptoms that I had leading up to my second really big Lyme flare when I was 25. During that flare, I had intermittent fevers. Um, but this part of the Lyme story, I'm going to talk about a couple symptoms that I had before that. So this is a time in my early 20s when I was 21, 22, 23, and up to 24. Okay, so during this time, I had an increase of more constant overall body pain and joint problems. Now, I'd always been prone to that in general before. I started to have chronic pain, chronic joint pain when I was 14. First, it started in my feet and lower legs, which is a big red flag for Bartonella. And then when I was 16, I had a carpal tunnel. So, um, yeah, that was always a big thing for me. Those were pretty severe and pretty debilitating in and of themselves. When I was 20, I got upper back and spine pain. But really, those are three areas of pain. And when I was in my mid 20s, I started just to get pain kind of all over and a general sense of achiness. So let's just talk through it. So I started to have my back go out. I've always wondered like what the technical term is when a back goes out, but you probably know what I'm talking about. Basically, your back or your neck will just become so inflamed and so painful that you need to be immobilized. You can't move, you can't turn your head, you can't do anything. You're laying in bed, moaning and groaning, trying to like figure out how to be in your body because everything just hurts. Yeah, that is what started to happen to me. The first time my back went out, I think I was 22. Yeah, I was 22. I was working one day and all of a sudden just my back went out. It was completely random. It wasn't related to anything I did at work. I was just standing there and then the back pain moved in. And I had to lay down on the floor. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I could hardly like move my arm. Somebody gave me a phone to call my roommate to come pick me up, and like I couldn't dial the number. And my roommate and her boyfriend like picked me up and like brought them into the back of their truck, which was very sweet. And yeah, I laid in bed for a number of days, and it was pretty painful, and I was really immobilized. For a moment I thought like, what if I'm just like this for the rest of my life, like on day 3? But eventually it did get better and I was able to get up and walk around and feed myself and bathe and kind of do basic necessities. But I was not nearly well enough to go to work. So I took a leave of absence from work and I asked a family member if they could please write me a check for 250 bucks so I could go home and live with my grandma for a while and then go to the acupuncture and herbal and chiropractic and massage clinic that I would work at occasionally. That was where my mentor Dina worked, but there was also a chiropractor there and a massage therapist. So I was like, I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna get as many treatments as I could. And it's also kind of funny to think that back then you could get a massage for like 50 bucks. You could get chiropractic work for 50 bucks and acupuncture. So, and plus since I worked there, I think that they gave me a deal. So maybe I had um, more, access to it. So I tried to get in as many treatments as I could, just like take care of my back, what's going on, get it in working order. And I stayed at my grandma's for maybe 3 weeks. And then I went back and was able to go about my daily life. I was mostly pain free and definitely could move a lot. I love to think about this time because this was a year after I had the summer school situation from hell when I was super exhausted. And I had intense insomnia, I had palpitation attacks, and the chemical sensitivity, like I talked about in the last video. And already 1 year later, I was like, my body says no, I have to listen. I'm going to make it work no matter what. So I did already kind of learn from that experience about how to prioritize my body and how to ask for help. And it's kind of funny because I don't necessarily do that now. I don't always prioritize my health. I mean, I do a lot, but there's always more that I could be doing. For instance, I could be getting body work, which I mostly get craniosacral, and chiropractic work every single week, but I only get them about once every 6 weeks. Mostly because I don't want to go into debt again, which I did when I was super, super sick just a few years ago over my Lyme costs. And if I did get that every week, I probably would be burning through a lot of cash, but it would totally be worth it. Like perhaps I would even be able to work right now. So I sometimes wish I was kind of like that old self where I really had nothing to lose. Why don't you just ask somebody to help you? Also, at this time, I am a little bit in reverence of my 22-year-old self's wisdom. I mean, you could also say stupidity. They go together sometimes. In that I took my last $90 and I bought myself a really comfortable pair of sandals. And I had them for 16 years, so definitely a very good investment. But I had like a friend who had these sandals and I would try them on. We were the same shoe size and I just fell in love with them. And I realized that I needed to start investing in quality things for myself. Around this time when I was 22, I was getting over my chronic plantar fasciitis, heel spur, migrating fat pad, foot pain, as well as my carpal tunnel pain because I had been doing Moxa for about a year. And after a year of doing Moxa, both of them were nearly 100% resolved. I would have to do Moxa once or twice a year for the next few years. And then now, then they just were basically cured, which was really, really amazing. So I've mentioned this in other videos, but Moxa is short for moxibustion. It's a Chinese medicine heat therapy technique where you burn kind of like a long incense type stick. I mean, there's many different types of Moxa, but the one I'm talking about is called pole Moxa or stick Moxa. And then you like wave like the heated tip over an area that's sore. And yeah, it really was a good fit for me and it worked. So that was a win from this time period. The sad thing is, now I try to do Moxa every day for this neuropathy and pain I have, but I just can't get around to it. I think it's because I have kids. So it's a lot easier before I had kids to spend all evening like taking a bath and doing Moxa for an hour, and doing yoga, and doing massage and stretching and blah, blah, blah. It's harder for me now to go do that when I could, I'd feel bad that I'm not putting them to bed or whatever. Just, yeah. But it would be worth it and it's a good thing to model. So anyways, it's something that I'm always negotiating and navigating now as a parent. Self-care can look very, very different. But in this story, I was 22 and I was going to do whatever it took to get better that I had. I started just to feel more empowered after I was using the Moxa on my wrists and feet and the good results that I had. And I started to delve even more into herbalism and learning about Chinese medicine. So I was using more herbs for different things in my life, like regulating my menstrual cycle. I never could get rid of the pain, but at least I regulated my menstrual cycle, which was important because I had a lot of spotting and a lot of long bleeding cycles, and I was severely anemic, so I don't need to be losing any extra blood. So with the help of my mentor, I kind of shored that up and got regulated with the rhythm of my menstrual cycle, which was really nice and again empowering to think that, God, I don't need every single area of my life to be out of balance. There are some things that I can make a dent in, and this happens to be one. Okay, so one kind of new symptom for me during this time in my mid 20s, early 20s was this very, very intense abdominal distension that was incredibly painful, and a feeling of hunger and fullness sensations being completely mixed up. So this lasted for probably about a year and a half, and it was really, really devastatingly bad for about 6 months, where every time that I would eat or drink even a sip of water, I would feel so full and my belly would just stick out and it was hard like a rock. Just, oh God, so uncomfortable, even from one sip of water. And I would have to just like hold my belly and lay down under the covers and just like sit there and kind of cope with the incredible discomfort, like minute by minute, breath by breath. Like, okay, you can get through this. You can do it. Keep breathing. It's going to be okay. Just every day, all day long, trying to cope with this discomfort that was very interfering with my daily life. This was probably in what, 2003, I guess, to, yeah, 2003, 2004. Believe it or not, this was before like the time of SIBO, and this was before gut health and microbiota became very popular. By the end of the 2000s, that was starting to really pick up, like gut health, and the microbiota became something very of interest. But around this time it still was not. um, Being in the alternative natural health circles, people did talk about dysbiosis, and we had a few, maybe like 2, 3 probiotics on hand, but that was it. There was no Saccharomyces, there was no coolers full of um, probiotics at the store. Um, it was just a different type of world. I don't know what I would think about that in hindsight. Would I have gone after a SIBO type thing? I don't know. Learning a little bit more about Bartonella over the past couple years makes me think of Bartonella belly. I did not have like acute belly aches. I was not like, didn't have nausea, vomiting sort of things. But I know that there can be a lot going on in the gut. I have been prone to mast cell problems, and I am a very histamine intolerant type of person. So we know that there's a lot of immunity happening in the gut. And the time where the distension started to happen was after the yeast had been resolved. In the last couple videos, I have been talking about how I had systemic yeast, and it, yeah, was all over, and I did an anti-yeast diet and had to stop eating sugar. It took about 2 years to kind of get that under control. So after that stopped, and I was out of the clutches of yeast driving me nuts and just being irritating all over, um, it was after that that the abdominal distension moved in. And I do not remember any time of being exposed to a gut pathogen. Like, I didn't get the stomach flu, I didn't have any acute issue. It just started with kind of bloating, and then within a few weeks, bloating does not describe it. It was intense distension. And the fullness and hunger signals was very, very confusing. I would be incredibly hungry and incredibly full at the exact same time, even after eating just a few bites of meal. So it was really confusing and stressful, basically. After maybe about a year of this, I started to eat gluten-free. Isn't it funny to think that gluten-free was like a new thing as well during this time? We'd always known about people who had celiac disease as an autoimmunity sort of situation, which we called celiac sprue, which some people still call it that. But gluten intolerance started to become more widespread around 2004, 5, 6. I worked at a co-op in Minnesota. So the co-op is basically like a natural food store. There's so many of them there. But I worked in this bakery, well, a deli where we made all sorts of different foods for like the deli case and out in the store, like grab and go stuff and pastry cases. And I did a lot of baking, and gluten-free baked goods started to come out, and we started to experiment with different flour ratios and recipes, and we found some that were really good, and I started to eat them, and I noticed that I did not have such severe distension when I ate the gluten-free things. I don't think that the distension was simply because of gluten intolerance, however, because I already was not eating very much gluten at all. I was more of a high protein, high fat, high vegetable sort of thing. I would never just think that I belong to a certain diet type. But if I had to kind of say, it was more like a old school paleo type diet, not really the trendy one we think of now, but there's this TED talk called Mind Your Mitochondria, where the first idea of a paleo diet was introduced. It's a little older, it's probably from 2010, and it was a physician that had a stroke, and she started just to eat more fat, more protein, and a lot of cruciferous vegetables, and just a lot of vegetables, and that was kind of my diet, but I had always had that diet. So this is why it just kind of sticks out in my head as such a weird thing. I didn't add anything new to like why this was happening. I did, however, eat a little bit more dairy during the distension period. I worked at an Indian restaurant where the food was super spicy. At the end of the night, the cooks would make these big meals for all the workers to eat, and it was super spicy, and so I would put yogurt on top of it, and you know that was sometimes problematic for my gut. Can't do dairy either, but at this time I was kind of in denial about it. um, but the thing is that I had the distension well before I started working at that restaurant and doing the dairy. So in my mind, I do wonder about kind of how it could be related to the nervous system, the vagus nerve, just because of those signalings of the fullness and the hunger being so messed up. And the incredible distension I had, I wonder if that was related to GALT inflammation. GALT is the gut associated lymphatic tissue. There's a lot of lymphatic stuff going on in your intestines. So now I will often feel that way if I'm having a Lyme or Bartonella or Mycoplasma flare in like my lower part of the spine. It will often kind of, the lymphatic area just goes crazy in my lower belly and will have some of these symptoms. So that's just kind of the thing that I think of the most, and that's why I bring it up here, because digestive issues don't really scream Lyme and co-infection at first glance, but if you look at it more closely, a lot of people have all sorts of digestive issues from mouth all the way down. So that's what I suspect. I think it's part of the Lyme symptomology for me at that time. All right, so in this early middle 20s, around the time where I was having the distension, my back going out, I also had kind of chronic low-grade palpitations. This continued on, like I mentioned in the last video, where I first started out with kind of really intense palpitation attacks. And then by this time, like 1, 2, 3 years later, the palpitations were not as strong and not as severe, but they were mild, they were more constant and more chronic. And with them continually happening, I started to have some anxiety come about with the palpitations. And also during this time, I did not have the shortness of breath. It was only these low-grade chronic palpitations. And some of the anxiety symptoms that I had, well, all of them actually, were related to my body in space. And I bring this up because my senses have always been prone to feel off. And proprioception is related to the senses in a way. You know, it's like, where are you in space? Are you going forward? Are you upside down? Are you backwards? Are your limbs on right? This is these palpitations were really associated with my proprioception, which sounds so weird to say, but let me just describe what would go on. So I'd be in my apartment, and I lived on a 4th story at the top of this apartment building, and it was a beautiful apartment. I loved it. It had high ceilings, and it was big, and it was amazing. Love that apartment. But I would be walking around doing my stuff, cooking, cleaning, whatever, hanging out, and all of a sudden I would get palpitations and a fear would rush in, and it would come like from my head and into my body. And it was like my body was afraid that I was now, like, it recognized that I was 4 stories up off the ground. Like, why are you so high off the ground? You're so high. What if the floors would go away? You would fall very quickly, and that's not good. You shouldn't be this high. So that would just come in, and I would be just like, I'm not scared of falling. This is an old building. I feel safe here. Nothing's happening to the floors. And it wasn't even like I was afraid of the floors going away. That was not the fear. The fear was just that the ground is down here and you are very high, and this is not good. Bodies are not supposed to be this high off the ground, is basically what the message was. And I would have to kind of wait around for that feeling to go away. Self-soothing didn't really help. I honestly just had to kind of wait for it to be like, oh, now I'm scared of being so high, and I can feel every single inch between me and the ground, and I'm just gonna have to, it will pass, just wait. So that would go on. Sometimes I would be on the bus and I would feel how fast I was going through the air, you know, and the buses don't even go that fast. And if the bus got into an accident, you're way more safe on there than anything else. But it was just like looking at things out the window, feeling the bus move. I could feel myself in space, and my body was like, you should not be going this fast. You're going to crash into something. And again, it wasn't that I was scared of an impact or an accident. It was just that it was going fast, and that's not normal. So those were the type of strange fears that I had that came with the palpitations. I also had disturbing dreams and really kind of stressful, ongoing situations in my dreams that reflected kind of the fear in everyday life. And I think this was related to my own Lyme and co-infection picture, because I'm just like worn down to a frazzle and my nervous system is totally overloaded and my senses are very aberrant. But I mean, it's also related to other things too, I think, just my own, the way that I am. Okay, so now I'm getting into the last part of this video where I had some extreme stress intolerance. I've always had stress intolerance since I was about, I don't know, in high school, I would say. Just things, I would get overwhelmed very easily. Things would feel too much. And I think the majority of that time was simply because I was totally exhausted and I was already overwhelmed with life. So it makes sense that I would have, like, yeah, I can't handle just even like going to school and going to work and feeding myself and waking up and sleeping. Of course, everything overwhelms me. I should be like tucked into a healing cave for the next 3 years. So some of that made sense. But when I was 24, my husband and I, we were dating at the time, moved into a house with 3 other guys. And I think they had a dog, and we had a dog. So it was kind of a full house. And the house was very messy, very noisy, lights on all night long, people coming and going. And it was not a party house at all. It was just young people doing their things, going in and out, staying up kind of late. Who knows who's there at what time. It just was somehow really ungrounding for me to be in that situation. And I had lived with tons of roommates before, and that didn't bother me. But during this time, my ability to handle stress was extremely low. And that was because I was going through another time of severe fatigue. So again, it was winter this time, and I was not sleeping about the same as in that summer from Summer School Hell. Probably 2 nights a week I would not sleep. Sometimes I would not sleep for 3 nights in a row. And I would try to nap and try to sleep in if I could. Sometimes I'd fall asleep at 5 o'clock and get a couple hours before I had to wake up. But generally I was not sleeping. And this started the cycle of the fatigue and the insomnia just flaring to way beyond my capacity to handle. So that is what was going on with my body, and my stress intolerance just went away. I think, okay, so what was going on is that I have had cycles of extreme insomnia and fatigue before. But during this cycle, something new happened, and that was I started to hallucinate during the day. And nobody could tell I was hallucinating. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't going through anything that was alarming. Like, I didn't need to check myself into a mental clinic or go to the doctor. I was not afraid. I knew what was going on. And that was REM sleep was at the very, very front of like what my brain wanted. And so if I shut my eyes for a moment, I would just start having these REM flashes of dreams. Basically, like, I was not dreaming at night and my brain waves were all messed up, and now dreams were coming in whenever they could. And it was just split seconds of, like, within 1 second I would have like 6 different dream visions, like just like one thing after the other, going on and on. And if I closed my eyes, I would just be kind of dreaming the whole time. And some of that I wouldn't be awake, and some of it I would, and I would halfway be in and out of sleep in the hypnagogic zone. It was intense, and then it started to happen with my eyes open when I was extremely tired. So I remember this one time I was working at the co-op. It opened at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I would have to go there in the middle of winter in northern Minnesota where it's like totally dark and there's 2 feet of snow on the ground and it's freezing cold. Just very uncomfortable and not enjoying life. Like, all I want to do is lay under 10 comforters forever. But I would go to work after not sleeping for 3 nights, and I remember seeing like dogs. Like, oh, dogs are around me. Okay, there's a dog. I'm like, wait a minute. No, now I'm dreaming while I'm awake. This is crazy. And I would see bears just like following me, like, okay, there's that. And then during my breaks, I would go, like, we'd have like a 15-minute break and then like a lunch break. And then depending how long your shift was, I think you had another 15-minute break at the end of the day. So what I would do is cover myself in these super heavy quilted insulated jackets that people would wear if you're like working in a walk-in freezer or a walk-in cooler. That they were just like hung up for anybody, workers, to wear. So I would put a whole bunch of them on and like cover myself with them, and I would go into a dark office. This was on a Saturday, so the office workers were gone. They have their break for the weekend, and I would find one that was open, go into it, made sure it didn't have any windows because I wanted it to be pitch black, and I would back myself up into a corner as just as tight as I could with 3, 4, 5 of these big jackets on and put myself in fetal position and take a look at my time, like my watch, and be like, okay, you got 15 minutes, just like get it out. And I would close my eyes in this dark room and just REM dream basically while I was trying to fall asleep. Like I would have liked to nap then. But since sleep was so hard, this was like the only way that I could get some sort of rest, not for my body, not for my brain, but for my senses. I had to like go into sensory deprivation, I guess. And then the REM dreaming would just happen. And then I could go on for another few hours at work without seeing random dogs and bears walking around me. I remember too, during this time, my senses were so aberrant that if somebody touched me like on the shoulder, I would feel it like on the opposite ankle. And I'd be like, oh my God, do that again. And when I touched myself, it didn't happen. But when somebody else touched me, I would feel it elsewhere. I remember my hair being really sensitive. Like somebody once touched my ponytail and I felt it all the way down my spine. It was like every single piece of hair and all the nerve endings connecting to it just transferred this feeling down into the rest of my body. And it was just like, I am so far gone. Like I'm hallucinating and I'm feeling things in wrong places. Now that has been just the way that my senses are, that Lyme and the co-infections, they're really inflammatory to the brain and they get into the sensory nerves. And so I think that was a big part of it. And I do have synesthesia already, so this brought it up to a new level. Part of the stress intolerance was something that makes me kind of cringe a little bit. It's an overused word that is losing its meaning and people get all reactive to it, but I'm just going to say it so you know what I'm talking about. But basically during this time, I started to have empath overload. And I had like a kind of like a rise or an increase in intuition and psychic abilities. So I could sense what other people were feeling emotionally and in their body, as well as kind of know what was going on with them. And this was not good because I needed stability and grounding. I can't even deal with my own senses, with what I'm hearing and seeing and touching, and I'm always hallucinating because I don't get any dreaming in because I'm an insomniac. I don't need to get other people's stuff in me. And I think I was 23 at this time, and I just didn't know better. Nobody used the term empath back then. Nobody. And I didn't know that. I did know that about myself, but I didn't know that I could be like, I don't want this to happen and make some boundaries or like do some things in my environment to change that. Instead, I just was like, oh my God, this is happening now. Now I can tell like when other people around me and like random people that come into my work, and like I worked at a grocery store, tons of people came through there. And it just became really, really overwhelming because I couldn't even deal with myself. I needed more stability and grounding and boundaries, not less. Okay. After we lived in this super messy house with 3 guys and a dog, we moved to a different house, my husband and I, and this was nice for a while, maybe like 2 months, maybe 3 months or so. It was good, and I started to kind of ramp down and just, I didn't have the sensory overload, I didn't have the extreme fatigue, I didn't have the empath overload either. So I became more regulated simply because I was in a more peaceful environment and I was starting to get restful sleep. But then everybody moved into our house. So we had 2 guys move into our house, and their girlfriends were there all the time. And I think that they both had dogs. So now we had 6 adults and 3 dogs, and I went from having this peaceful, loving place and get to spend time with my husband. I was enjoying life. I mean, he was my boyfriend at the time still, but um, then it just was right back where we were, of like too many people, being way too noisy, having all the lights on. Like I couldn't handle the mess and like just other people's stuff. And let me tell you, I am not a type A person. I am not a clean freak at all. Like, I do like things to be clean, but I'm not 100%. I'm like an 80%er of cleanliness. I would say just my normal state without trying really hard. Um, I'm like the kitchen and the living room will be picked up perfectly, all the dishes done, everything wiped down, like 5 out of 7 days. Like I'm never have to have it clean all the time. The dirtiness doesn't bother me. I mean, it does bother me, but like not to an extreme level. It wasn't that I didn't like the way things looked. I just didn't like the way things felt. So I got right back to where I was with having extreme fatigue, empath overload, synesthesia, and I just went crazy. I was so ungrounded and so not happy with my home life that I quit my job because I couldn't handle all the people coming into this restaurant. What did at this grocery store, this busy grocery store that I worked, and I started working at this like spa sort of thing at the reception desk, which was a lot more peaceful. There was like water features, and there was a sauna there that I could use. People were really calm. The people were nice. It was in a beautiful location. There's plants everywhere. So I went down to this very, very stressless job. But I specifically was like, I cannot work in a busy place anymore. Like my senses are going fucking nuts. So I got myself a less stressful job, and I went on through the summer, and things were not getting better. I mean, I did feel better not being out around people in public, but my home life was just awful. Just all the stress and all the people all the time, and all their shit and all the boy smells, and I wanted my home to be a sanctuary where I could relax, and it was not at all like that. So I hit my limit, and I decided to move back to my hometown, live with my grandma, who I loved, hang out with all my friends back home, which is always a fun thing. And I worked at the acupuncture herbal clinic that I had for, on and off for many years. I worked there again for 4 months. So I stayed at my grandma's, and I also had this other job at a farm, which was really nice. It was a good time, except my grandma's house had mold, and that really affected me. The room that I stayed in did not have mold, but right underneath it, in the basement, the room right underneath where like this vent was that went between my room and the room in the basement for like air exchange, there was mold all around that room, like right in that corner. So I was just inhaling that all night long. I'm sure I could smell it. Other people could smell it. Everybody knew it. People tried to help my grandma out, but it was like a cinder block, concrete type of house. And in Minnesota, sometimes those concrete cinder block houses, if they get mold in it, it's like you're never going to get it away. It's just kind of stuck in there. You have to like demolish that part of the wall and rebuild it or something. So yeah, the mold came in, and what happened is I started to get knee pain, one knee pain in my left knee. It became very inflamed and painful, and I started to have a hard time walking around and moving, and it was painful when I was sleeping. And I did some things in my life to help deal with the pain. And looking back, just very recently, this has made me sad because I really, really tried to deal with this undiagnosed Lyme and co-infections through lifestyle medicine. And there's nothing wrong with using lifestyle medicine, like eating a certain way, taking care of yourself, doing physical therapy or movement or whatever. Like, that's important, that's good. Like, that is a wonderful way to manage symptoms and to calm and balance your nervous system. And it could potentially help to regulate your nervous system. And if your body is at a balanced state, you could then, in fact, mount an immune response to those bacteria. You could kill them. Like, there's research about that, right? But only if the bacteria are like not overgrown and chronic. Like, in my case, there was never enough healthy food or bone broth or yoga or meditation to get rid of the bacteria. The bacteria at some point, for me, will need to be killed and just get out, you know? Like, it had come to such a point. There was no medicating it with lifestyle medicine. And why this makes me sad is because for two reasons. One, I became kind of addicted, or dependent is a better word, on yoga, for instance, to manage my pain. I did not do yoga because I mean, I did enjoy it, but all of the reasons that I now would like look for an activity or a hobby, I didn't really have those. I was like, I'm doing this because if I do it, I feel a tiny bit better and I can be in this body that's full of pain all the time if I just do an hour and a half of yoga every day. And that's just not necessarily the right use. I didn't do it to feel good. I did it so I didn't feel totally awful. I didn't do it because I enjoyed the teachings. I didn't do it because I liked the community. I did it because I had to. It was the only way that I could manage my pain. And it also makes me sad because I feel like I missed an opportunity. Because in the very first video on my Lyme story, I talked about how when I grew up in Minnesota and Wisconsin, I grew up right on the border, so I'm from both places. It's really confusing, I know. What people would say around me is that if you had one knee pain, then that's a sign of Lyme. Now, is it really a sign of Lyme? Like, yeah, I think having just a single joint pain issue that you can't relate to an injury or something is potentially a sign of Lyme. But for some reason, in where I grew up during that time, it was like, oh, you have one knee hurting, that must be Lyme, go in and get it checked. So that was kind of the guidance I had known about Lyme for so long, but I didn't heed that advice. I had the opportunity to make the connection, but I didn't. And I even remember people talking to me about their Lyme in one knee and being like, oh, I had one knee pain. I see you have that. It turned out for me that it was Lyme, and I went into the doctor and I got some antibiotics, and now I feel better. And we know that for some people, antibiotics are not going to make it feel better, especially at this time. I had already had Lyme I got it when I was 18, so what, 16 years. Probably wasn't acute, so perhaps those wouldn't be the best choice for me. Plus, I had already done antibiotics twice and they didn't work. All of that put aside, I at least could have had an opportunity to put Lyme on my radar. But for some reason, I didn't. Looking back at this time and kind of working through, like, why didn't I make the connection that it was Lyme? And there is a big factor, and that was I didn't have health insurance. So I was not going to go to the doctor and be like, hey, do you think this is Lyme disease? Let's get some tests. I was not going to do that. And plus, I had been to the doctor many times and they never really could help me. So I was kind of done with that chapter of my life. If I would have had access to health insurance, maybe I would have been more receptive to the multiple people in my life from my hometown area telling me that they had Lyme and maybe I could have it too. But honestly, I made absolutely no connection to that. I just wasn't able to do that at that time. Another thing that came with the mold exposure was this really heavy, dense, painful kind of crushing fatigue in my body. So it was like all my muscles were very fatigued, and they were sore and painful and achy, as if this oppressive tiredness was just like seeping in and infecting all around. And that, I think, is kind of a mold symptom for me. This was also before I realized that there were things that you could do about mold exposure. I was just like, yeah, I'm living in my grandma's house. There's mold there. I guess I'll just have to deal, and then I'll move out someday. I didn't realize that I could take binders or do different things with my diet or different supplements to help with detox. I didn't do any of that. And I could have, but I just wasn't in a spot to feel empowered and clear about what was going on with me. I think it was because I was used to being very chronically ill since I was 12, which at this point was like, I don't know, 12 years of feeling this way, and having all of my teenage years and now all my adult years just feeling like this. I kind of got used to it and accepted it. Like, well, this is just what happens to me. That's that. The last bit of symptoms in this time period, when I was 24, was an overall increase in joint and muscle pain and dysfunction. So that means like the joints are not working. They would go out. They would feel funny when I was moving. This was when SI joint pain started to come in and be a big factor for me, and hip pain. And it became harder to sleep. I remember trying to fall asleep at night, not being in an insomnia flare, but the tension and pain in my body would prevent that. And so I started to play around with herbs and different things and acupressure. I was a little bit more proactive about what my toolbox was at this time. And I did have a bathtub, and I would take Epsom salts baths. So I started to become more, I don't know, like able to respond to those things. And I started to hear from friends and colleagues and different people talk about possibly me going in to get different diagnoses related to my body pain and my joint pain. And at this time, I was not ready to go to the doctor yet. First of all, I still didn't have health insurance, and I wasn't going to pay for that out of pocket. So I didn't pursue that, but I started to play around with this question of what is wrong with me. Maybe something is wrong with me, but the only kind of answer that was coming my way was like, oh, you have fibromyalgia, or you have chronic fatigue, or you have arthritis. And those three things didn't sit well with me. And part of it was I would look at like the different areas of the body that are generally tender when you have fibromyalgia, and I didn't have tenderness in all of them. So actually not even very many of them. But from what I heard, other people were like, actually, if you just say you have tenderness in one area and it's been X long, whatever, you could get a diagnosis. And I started to just play around with that in my mind. Like, does that feel right? Is that what's going on? And I kind of dialogued with my body of like, is this fibromyalgia? Is this arthritis? And I did not believe that any of those things were worth me pursuing, not even really to rule out. It just didn't seem complete. It didn't seem like I fit any of them. Now, Some people totally do. And, you know, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having these diagnoses, or even people with Lyme pursuing them so that you can get like, I don't know, disability, or like not just walk around with Lyme. Like sometimes you have another diagnosis, the medical system can be a little bit more beneficial to you. Um, but I wasn't quite ready to do that, and it just didn't sit right. But it got me thinking, what's wrong? What's wrong? Maybe something is wrong. Maybe it's not just the way that I am or the way that my life is. One good thing from this time period is that I became more skilled with herbs, and I started to use them specifically for all of the chronic colds and flus and sore throats that I was having. And during this time, I entered into a many years, maybe 10 years of only getting a cold once a year. And that was a huge win for me. Now, it wasn't quite at this period when I was 24, but I started to kind of chip away at it. So my immunity was really improving, and that was really, really nice. And I also became more adept at treating my own UTIs, and yeah, because I think that's part of my mycoplasma picture, and it just didn't make sense for me to keep running to the doctor over that. And I say treat because I'm an acupuncturist, so I can actually work with that. Back then, I probably would have just said I was using herbs to help at home with having UTIs. So that was kind of two wins from this time period, is less chronic colds and flus and sore throats, and I was able to get on top of the UTIs. So this is the end of this video, and in the next one I'm going to start talking about my second kind of like super major flare that I had. I didn't know I had Lyme at the time, but looking back, oh yes, it was. And I just want to say thanks for listening, and yeah, best of luck to anybody on their chronic illness journey, whether it's with Lyme or the co-infections or chronic pain, whatever it is. You take good care, and see you later. Bye.